Helen of Troy was the face that launched 1,000 ships. In 2026, it turns out she's also the face that launched 1,000 opinion pieces, 6-hour live streams, and a very public response from the world's richest man. The rumor began like any other. A whisper that Christopher Nolan was considering casting Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy in his upcoming adaptation of Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey. And almost instantly, the internet did exactly what we all knew it would do. It retreated into its respective trenches, armed with the same tired arguments that have been thrown around for a decade. But here's the thing. It's depressing that we're even having to have this conversation. There's something profoundly exhausting about the fact that before a single frame of film has been shown, we aren't talking about Nolan's use of IMAX or the narrative structure of Homer's epic. We're talking about the online discourse surrounding Hollywood's recent casting practices. But it wasn't always this way. We used to be able to have open discussions about casting choices, narrative decisions, and set designs, with the foundational idea that every choice being made was simply due to the creator's artistic vision. Films didn't consistently feel like battlegrounds. And I think the real question is, what changed?
The most important thing is making sure that this third movie in a series of 7 can be seen and enjoyed by audiences of today's moral and ethical standards.
There is a lot of finger pointing as to why film discussion has become so charged lately. But I think it comes down to the fact that the spirit of the conversation has fundamentally changed. That Hollywood has lost a key component necessary to having an open-minded and artistic conversation. They've lost the benefit of the doubt. I think it's easy to get sucked into the online rhetoric that inevitably arises in discussions regarding race swaps of iconic characters. But those conversations are usually unproductive and often plagued by straw man arguments. I think this is a flashpoint for a much deeper tension. I think it's about the difference between intuitive and unintuitive casting, and how the response to that debate is shaping the relationship between Hollywood and its audience. When an audience sees a casting choice that feels unintuitive, and by the way, when I say unintuitive, I mean it breaks the internal logic, or the historical, or even cultural shorthand of the story. Their first instinct used to be curiosity, like, oh, I wonder what the vision is there. But Hollywood has spent the last few years trading artistic mystery for moral posturing. Because the industry has so often framed casting as a political victory or a social mandate, the audience has stopped looking for the art. They're looking for the lecture. People aren't fighting about Helen of Troy because they're all amateur historians or closeted bigots. And sure, there has been a history of bad faith actors using art to score political points. But for most people, the reaction is a form of pattern recognition. It's an annoyance at the performative nature of modern Hollywood. Remember when Samuel L. Jackson was cast as Nick Fury, or Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon? There wasn't a global crisis of faith. Why? Because those choices weren't sold to us as a moral litmus test. They were just great actors being cast in roles because they fit the vibe of the world being built. It felt intuitive to the art, not mandated to score some political points. I feel like people have been conditioned to find these types of conversations uncomfortable. But I think it's important to discuss how Hollywood moved away from intuitive casting and into a self-inflicted identity crisis, and how that very shift is making the act of creation almost impossible. And let's be clear, it was Hollywood that got weird about race, not the audience. To truly understand the absurdity of the current state of Hollywood casting, I think we have to look at where it all started. And let's be honest, the early days of Hollywood casting were, well, they were a mess.
In the early days of Hollywood, the bar for casting was set very low. Looking back, it was an era defined by a general sense of what were they thinking.
I'm telling you, look, we got to agree on this. The whole idea is getting the right color shoe polish. Oh!
It was the least intuitive casting in cinematic history. And I want to be clear, there isn't a single reasonable person left on the planet arguing that we should go back to this. Take Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's. It is the ultimate cinematic jump scare. You're watching this elegant, charming masterpiece, and then suddenly, a legendary white actor pops up in yellowface with buck teeth and a sing-songy accent.
You cannot go on or keep ringing my bell. You disturb me. You must have a key me.
It's a bewildering decision. You could argue about how offensive it is, but at the end of the day, it's just bad art. It's a caricature that breaks the movie. And I think we can all agree, these types of decisions were a failure of imagination. Or maybe too much imagination. A course correction wasn't about being woke, even though that term didn't exist back then. It was just necessary for the sake of quality. And we only bring this up to explain clearly standards have changed since then. Clearly, the industry moved towards more intuitive casting. As standards changed, so did Hollywood's attitude towards casting. So much so that there was a time when certain forms of blackface were considered tasteful. Take Laurence Olivier in Othello, for which Olivier won an Oscar. This was an era where the quality of the performance was seen as the highest form of respect you could pay a character. By modern standards, seeing Olivier in blackface is jarring, but at the time, his intent wasn't to mock. He spent months developing a basso profundo voice and a specific gait. This wasn't a minstrel show. He viewed playing the Moor as the absolute pinnacle of his acting craft. The industry's logic was, this role is so important, we need the greatest actor alive to do it justice, even if that meant a white man in a blueberry-colored makeup kit. Hollywood had the benefit of the doubt because the intent was clear. The decision seemed based on balancing acting ability with complete immersion. A perfect example would be Ben Kingsley in Gandhi. Kingsley, born Krishna Pandit Banji, is actually of Indian descent. But because he is naturally light-skinned, the production still felt the need to significantly darken his skin. Why? Because visual fidelity to the historical figure was a priority. Race wasn't a social statement back then, it was a detail to be managed so the acting could take center stage. And Kingsley won an Oscar for this portrayal. There was an understanding that if you stray too far away from the audience's expectations, it makes the actor's job almost impossible. In this era, the audience gave Hollywood the benefit of the doubt because they felt the intent was excellence, not politics. By the time we hit the 90s, we reached an era of true colorblind casting. Anything was possible. You had Michael Clark Duncan cast as Kingpin. You had Cinderella played by Brandy. You even had Morgan Freeman play a white Irishman named Red after his red hair, and they didn't even change his name. If and when casting was unintuitive, there was no expectation an explanation would be given, but it also wasn't flaunted for political points. So people just assumed it was the best actor they could get for the role. It was a pretty fun time. It truly felt like the audience in Hollywood had come together to make it just about the art. It was so not a big deal that in 1993, Kenneth Branagh gave us much to do about nothing. He cast Denzel Washington as Don Pedro and Keanu Reeves as his brother Don John. Now, biologically, doesn't make a lick of sense. Historically, in 16th century Italy, probably not what the neighborhood looked like. But here's the magic. The movie never mentions it. There are no press tours about breaking barriers or modernizing outdated material. Branagh just put the best actors he could find in the roles, and the audience followed him. Because the focus was purely on the art, the audience didn't feel lectured, they felt invited. We didn't need a reason for Denzel to be there, other than the fact that he's Denzel Washington, and he's incredible at Shakespeare.
So, how did we go from the effortless inclusion of the 90s, where art and talent came first, to this era of weird moral mandates? In the 90s, we had acting over representation. Today, we have representation over acting. And with that shift, a strange kind of selective noticing developed. In the modern discourse, if you notice there isn't enough representation, you're applauded for your social awareness. But if you notice an overrepresentation, even if it's just because it breaks the internal logic of the world, you're a bigot. In both scenarios, you'll notice one thing is missing: any discussion about the quality of the acting or how the casting serves the story. This isn't just a feeling audiences have, it is literally encoded into the business. In 2021, ABC released inclusion standards that weren't just suggestions. They required 50% or more of regular characters to come from underrepresented groups. Dana Walden, the chairman of Disney General Entertainment at the time, put it bluntly. She said, "I will tell you for the first time, we received some incredibly well-written scripts that did not satisfy our standards in terms of inclusion, and we passed on them."
I'm waiting for you guys to praise me.
What? Why?
Oh, because I'm doing something anti-racist, and I think I deserve praise for that, do I not?
You don't get praise for telling people you're not racist.
Then why am I doing it?
Think about that. Incredibly well-written scripts were rejected because they didn't hit a percentage. Hollywood is now okay with telling a worse story if it satisfies their performative corporate mandate. We've achieved a diversity of skin tone, but we're losing the diversity of stories. This extends all the way to the Academy Awards. The new Best Picture quota suggests that without the Academy's help, people of color wouldn't be capable of winning on merit alone. It's the subtle bigotry of lowered expectations. Compare The Mandate to a film like Ryan Coogler's Sinners. It's not nominated because it was a white film with forced diversity. It's a film by a Black director telling a Black story. It didn't achieve diversity through a corporate checklist. It achieved it by investing in an artist who had a vision. Mandates like these are unnecessary and unproductive. It demonstrates a lack of self-awareness from the industry. Hollywood demands answers from the past, but thinks it will never have to answer for the decisions they're making today. But in their condescension and their belief that they finally reached peak progressiveness, they've forgotten that one day, they will also be judged. They're assuming their current moral clarity won't look just as confused to people 50 years from now.
This is a cast and a Danish production, which is entirely Nordic. It therefore has some lack of diversity, you would say, as also new rules are implied in Hollywood.
What are you on to?
Sorry, but
From the get-go.
From the get-go, there is said some... Okay.
Well, first of all, the film takes place in Denmark in the 1750s.
Another key component to why Hollywood has lost the benefit of the doubt is that they're not even trying to signal that it's about the art, or finding the best actor for the role, or creating more stories that are inclusive. Instead of talking about possibilities, they're talking about permission. Instead of talking about what an actor can bring to a role, they're talking about who should be allowed to play the role. It all just feels like a step backwards. Do we really want a society where actors have to submit their 23andMe results to their agent? Odessa Azion recently exited an A24 film because of backlash over her playing a character with Mexican heritage. Meanwhile, Rachel Zegler, who is of Colombian descent, played a Puerto Rican character in West Side Story, and then was cast as Eva Perón, who was Argentinian. Hollywood decides when close enough is okay, and when it's a cancelable offense. With this little consistency, Hollywood just invites ridicule. Even Marvel is doing it. In the show Echo, they changed Maya Lopez's tribe from the Blackfeet Nation to the Choctaw Nation. They literally erased one tribe's representation to fit a different, authentic narrative they wanted to tell. It is unhelpful, it's absurd, and it's clearly not achieving its goal of inclusion.
This whole line of thinking from Hollywood is just absurd. They're actively undoing the very progress they claim to champion. Because while Hollywood spends millions on diversity consultants, they've inadvertently built something much more restrictive, a bubble of ignorance. They've created a psychological bubble where the industry decides which cultures need careful representation and which can be treated as interchangeable background noise. It's a hierarchy of visibility. In the most glaring irony, they do things like denounce the legacy of colonization while using its most effective tool, the monolith. Hollywood has created a cultural blur when depicting African culture. Often actors are cast to play characters from entirely different countries, entirely different tribes, who speak entirely different languages. Or African or British actors will be cast and use a generalized Hollywood African accent. Often, there is zero investment into the actual tribe, the specific dialect, or the unique cultural history. If Hollywood doesn't want to put in the effort, they decide it's close enough. But in doing this, they're effectively reinforcing the colonial mindset that Africa is just one giant, homogenous country. It's not so different from the colonial gaze. It's equivalent to saying, we see your skin tone, but we don't care about your specific history. It's a minimum effort approach aimed at getting the accolades for championing diversity while never actually investing in other cultures. I think Hollywood needs to realize they can't have it both ways. They can't be incredibly pedantic about authenticity in one breath, creating an atmosphere where actors are afraid to take roles unless they perfectly match the heritage of the character, and then turn around and treat an entire continent like a mix and match costume closet. It's not progress. It's just them deciding what level of ignorance is acceptable. And what makes this a problem is they do this while actively browbeating the audience for not being sensitive enough to these very issues.
I think this is what makes the idea of casting Lupita as Helen of Troy complicated. As people have noticed, what feels like a differential enforcement on these issues, the conversation has turned contentious. Because it's obvious, Hollywood picks and chooses when race matters. Now, a lot of people in and around Hollywood have been making the argument that it's not hypocrisy, it's the difference between whether the race is foundational to the story or simply an aesthetic choice. For instance, Hollywood has said you cannot cast a white man as Black Panther because the story is fundamentally about the African experience and the legacy of colonialism, that the race of Black Panther is foundational, their claim being that race is the engine to the story. Conversely, they're trying to argue Helen of Troy's race is aesthetic. They have said Helen of Troy's whiteness is not foundational to the story. that she is just a symbol of a beauty so profound it breaks the world. But the problem is, people aren't looking at casting in a vacuum anymore, because Hollywood has lost the benefit of the doubt. And these types of arguments seem insincere, especially when historical figures have had their race changed in the past.
I don't care what they tell you in school. Cleopatra was black.
They either try rewriting history or telling people to get over it because it's not a big deal. Then there is the fact that Helen of Troy is not only the epitome of beauty, but the epitome of a very specific type of beauty, Hellenic beauty, which was named after her, which is deeply rooted in Greek culture. What makes this so tiresome is it just feels like gatekeeping and gaslighting, because you could also argue that Black Panther is just a mantle. Mechanically, the story says that whoever wins the trial and consumes the heart-shaped herb becomes the Panther. In a vacuum, a white African baby could have been adopted by the royal family and could technically go through that trial. You could argue that there's a fascinating, complex story there about colonial legacy and what it means to be African. But in the current climate, that story is undirectable. Why? Because Hollywood would argue the thematic engine of Black Panther isn't just the mantle, it's Pan-Africanism and the response to global anti-Blackness. In their eyes, the race is the engine. And what makes this even more complicated is I've seen a lot of discourse try to outright dismiss the right to have any expectation on racial casting with Helen of Troy. They've pointed out that Helen of Troy is not a real person because she's mythological and the daughter of Zeus. But then the exact same argument can be made regarding Black Panther, because T'Challa is not a real person, Wakanda is not a real country, and superheroes don't exist. But I think we can all see these types of conversations are ridiculous and don't really go anywhere and only really demonstrate where people draw the line and stop caring. And this reveals the trap. If a character's race is foundational because of a 20th century political theme, why isn't a character's race foundational when it's baked into the literal text of a 3,000-year-old epic?
This whole situation highlights how bad faith actors in the Hollywood ecosystem have removed the audience's ability to give them the benefit of the doubt. They've done this by repeatedly and intentionally misrepresenting discussions so they can appear morally superior. The conversation around the casting of Helen of Troy is the perfect example of this. Because on one hand, we have the observational argument, which functions as a standard deductive process. It begins with the premise that Helen of Troy is a specific literary entity defined by the Homeric text, someone described as white-armed and fair-haired. It then looks at the historical precedent of iconic screen portrayals that have traditionally adhered to these phenotypes. Because the audience expected Christopher Nolan's Odyssey to be a grounded, faithful adaptation rather than a total deconstruction, this argument concludes that casting Lupita is simply unintuitive. It doesn't comment on the quality of the actress, it merely notes a mismatch between the source material's blueprint and the final product. By contrast, look at how bad faith actors in the Hollywood space respond. They don't engage with the text, they use equivocation. They change the meaning of a word mid-argument to achieve their goal. They perform a bait and switch. They stop treating Helen as a person, a character with a history and a description, and start treating her as a concept, the abstract idea of beauty. By shifting from character to concept, they can ignore the actual point about textual fidelity. They replace it with a point that is easier to attack. Oh, so you're saying Lupita isn't beautiful? They aren't arguing with you. They're arguing with a version of you they made up in their head. They present the audience with only two options. You either accept this casting without question, or you are a racist who denies the beauty of Black women. It completely ignores the middle ground, the perfectly logical position that someone can think Lupita is beautiful, but also think she is the wrong fit for this specific iconic role. Because they can't defeat the textual accuracy argument on its own merits, they shift the focus to the observer's moral character. The goal isn't to win the debate, it's to make the conversation so socially expensive that you stop talking. This is why people are so exhausted with this line of thinking. While Hollywood pretends they're fighting bigotry and real-life villains, people just think they're obnoxious. They're creating a conversation that does not exist.
I think this is why it's so hard to take Hollywood seriously. While Hollywood demands a one-to-one lived experience for modern roles, they treat ancient European literature as a blank canvas. They act as though any expectation when it comes to historical text is ridiculous, while treating modern comic books as sacrosanct heritage. I think things would get better if Hollywood could understand. When the audience notices an unintuitive choice, like a Black Helen, it's not necessarily bigotry, it's pattern recognition. They are noticing that the rules of fidelity only seem to apply in one direction. If you're told a story is a historical epic, your brain looks for historical shorthand. When that shorthand is broken, you ask, why? The problem is that Hollywood no longer gives us an artistic answer to that why. They give us a political one. Most people aren't reacting to the actors themselves. Lupita Nyong'o is a very well-respected actress. The discussion isn't about her. It's about the lack of good faith in Hollywood's own rhetoric. The audience can tell when a choice is being made for the sake of the story and when it's being made for the sake of a press release. We can sense when inclusion is being used as a shield to deflect legitimate criticism of a film's quality. When the rhetoric is this confused, the art becomes secondary to the argument. People have become very aware of corporate performative wokeness. I think most people think it's cynical and intrusive.
We have come to the conclusion that you, and only you, have the knowledge, the experience, and the authenticity to tell this story. So we are going to do the right thing. We're going to do the woke thing and hand complete creative control over to you.
I feel like you were going to say something else.
Well, I think he was waiting for the applause.
Oh, okay.
It's nice when it happens.
Sure. Nice when it happens naturally. When it happens naturally, I like it. Yeah, listen, the point is we want you to know that we are allies.
Now, the thing is, obviously loose adaptations do exist, and oftentimes they can expand art. James Joyce's Ulysses took Homer's epic and set it in Ireland. The Coen brothers, O Brother, Where Art Thou, moved it to the American South. In these cases, the audience didn't have a problem with race swaps or argue about historical accuracy because the creators made it clear. This is a retelling. They weren't claiming to be faithful to the Mycenaean period. They were using the myth as a skeleton for a new body. Loose adaptations expand art, but when Hollywood claims they're being authentic or implies they're being authentic while ignoring the source's text and descriptions, they create a dissonance that feels like a lie, especially when it's become all too common for the people defending the choice not to mention anything to do with artistry, and instead use it as a chance to score political points. Over the past couple years, there really has been an unhelpful tone out of Hollywood. It's very, I hear what you're saying, but I know what you really mean. It's very performative, and it assumes the worst of the audience. This tone has felt like the default in anything involving race over the past couple of years. It has severely damaged Hollywood's legitimacy as artists. Hollywood lost credibility when they started using race as a PR gimmick. They promoted movies based on skin color rather than quality, tokenizing their own actors. They turned race into a marketing tool, and now they're shocked that the audience sees everything through a political lens. They traded the magic of make-believe for the cloud of the press release, and as a result, it's made discussing films feel like a lecture or a political debate.
Ultimately, Hollywood's current problem is that they've created a trap they can't escape. They want to be the moral arbiters of the past while remaining immune to the logic of the present. If we truly live in a world where representation is more important than the art, where lived experience is the only valid passport to a role, then the argument has to be consistent. If a white actor shouldn't play a minority character because of authenticity, then if Nolan casts a non-Greek as Helen, by the industry's own modern rules, he's being disrespectful to Greek heritage. It creates a standard that's nearly impossible to live up to. And where does it end? Christopher Nolan is British. Does that make him unqualified to adapt a Greek epic? Hollywood introduced this line of thinking and is actively constricting art. And this brings us to the core of the frustration. We can all perform the mental gymnastics necessary to justify a casting change. We can find a thematic reason, a subtextual loophole, or a historical what if. But at the end of the day, it still comes back to a simple question. Is it intuitive? Does the choice serve the story being told, or does it serve a corporate initiative? The most telling part isn't the casting itself, it's the reaction to being questioned. When the audience asks, why this choice? A healthy artistic industry responds with an artistic explanation. They talk about the vision, the performance, and the why of the make-believe. But Hollywood's current reflex is to skip the explanation and go straight to the name-calling and political rhetoric. If you notice the choice, you're a problem. If you question the logic, you're being unreasonable. By turning every creative decision into a moral litmus test, Hollywood has effectively killed the benefit of the doubt. Art is supposed to be the bridge between us, but by overcomplicating creativity with social stigma and bad faith lectures, Hollywood has burnt that bridge. We either live in a world where true colorblindness is the goal, where we allow the power of the performance to suspend our disbelief, where talent is the only passport needed to inhabit a role, or we live in a world of hard representation. If we choose the latter, then storytelling is restricted by birthright. It means your heritage is your only permit to explore a specific story. And if that's the world Hollywood wants, then they have to accept the consequences. It comes down to, are we trying to make films for the sake of art or political capital?